What is up, YouTubers, gamers and hobbyists? Welcome to Memory Lane, the series where I literally take a trip down memory lane and reminisce over some nostalgic stuff. And in this episode, I want to have a look at the very first home computer I ever owned as a child. I want to have a look at the Sinclair ZX81. Now this is it. This is my copy or my version of the ZX81. It's not the one I had as a child, sadly. I don't actually know what happened to that, to be honest with you. Honestly, I don't, for the life of me, I do not know. I wished I'd kept it. You know, it's like one of those things, isn't it? You just let things go as you grow up, and later on when you're an adult, when you're older, you realise you wished you'd kept it. So, the Sinclair ZX81, what a nostalgia beast this is. This is an 8-bit beauty. Now, there was the ZX80 before this, I never got that. This was my first introduction to it, and it came in the form of a very close friend of mine who had one. I'd never heard of home computers. I'd heard of computers, obviously, but it was like home computers. I thought computers, and this might sound far-fetched to you, but I thought computers at the time were like those big things that took up a whole room with loads of spinning discs and wheels and all that gubbins. No, this was something literally you could sit on your desktop, plug into your TV, and away you go. This computer was black and white, boasted no sound. Like I say, if you buy the base unit, it is a 1K machine, but that said, there are plenty of 1K games for the ZX81, and we'll come on to those in another video. For this video, which is kind of the introduction video, I just wanted to go over just 5 random games, or probably one of the first few lots of games I came across. Probably was the first 5 games I encountered. There were more, and these were owned by my friend, of course, but I can remember sitting in his bedroom as he fired up this machine, these black and white graphics on this, able to play games like Space Raider and Bomber and, you know, adventure games, and it blew my mind. I actually went insane for this machine, absolutely insane. Of course I ended up getting one eventually, because I was hooked then. You know, I used to go around his house and that's what we'd do. We'd play the ZX81, we'd hang out, you know, have a good time, blah, blah. And yeah, that's what we did. That is what we did. And of course, there was the self-programming era that came not long after, and in the form of a monthly magazine that was called Sinclair Programs. Now, this was for... It was for the ZX80, ZX81 and ZX Spectrum, and that was it. And this was games that were written by fans, by, you know, the likes of you and I, in our homes, in our bedrooms, wherever, just sent off the listings, and other people could type in the listings and then play the games themselves. Now, of course, you know, you had a range of games, from very, very simple games to quite complex games. Needless to say, they rarely worked. Well, they did eventually. But what would generally happen is you'd spend like all weekend typing out this really long program for it not to work, be full of bugs. And then the following month, what they would do is they would print the corrections for you to do for the previous month, and then you could like play the game and save it onto your cassette, because that's what we used back then. And yeah, and then you could play that game. Awesome. Right, without further ado then, let's get on to one of the first games that I loved on this machine. So, on to the first of the 5. This is 3D Monster Maze, and this is actually the cassette tape cover that you can see there. And this is I mean, there were probably several versions of this, but this is the actual one I remember my friend having. And eventually I ended up having this one too. And yeah, so it was a 3D game. It wasn't the very first game I saw on the ZX81. but it was one of the first. And it's a 3D game. There were some 3D games, and yet the funny thing is, I don't remember the author's name, but I do remember it years ago, an interview I read with him, and he was asked, how did you manage to get 3D graphics on a machine that wasn't capable of doing 3D graphics? And his answer was simply, I didn't realise it wasn't capable of doing 3D graphics. So he did it. Onto this opening screen here with this like clown character going roll up, and it was brilliant. It was a cracking intro into the game. The premise of the game was simple. You were placed in this randomised 3D maze, and all the purpose of the game was, all you had to do was find the exit. That was it, whilst avoiding the Tyrannosaurus Rex that was in there. And he would go around, you know, he was trying to find you and eat you, and all you had to do was avoid him and try and get to the exit. That was it. It was such a simple game. It would come with little messages, and every so often, like, footsteps are near and blah blah blah, just to build the tension. But anyway, this opening screen with this clown, it was brilliant because the writing would scroll up, and yes, okay, it's, you know, the graphics are very basic, but with, you know, you're forgetting this is like one of the very first home computers, you know, this was before consoles even, you know, and we'll come on to that at a later date, but anyway, yeah. So to me, this just blew my mind. You know, it's like, wow, look at this, it's absolutely amazing. So the writing would scroll up, and then towards the end of his little speech, he'd remove his hat and bow his head, probably because he thought you were going to die, and chances were you were going to. The next screen here is like one of the, as you're in the maze, just to show you, and as you would walk forwards or turn around, you know, you could go left, forward, back, left, right, you know, turn around, and the maze would come towards you. And then the next one, this is one of the screens I found with the Tyrannosaurus like coming towards you. He would like amble towards you, and then there'd be a screen with like in his mouth with his teeth, and you'd be dead, sort of thing. And the only other thing that you could see really was if you found the exit, which was like a sort of like a flashing square, really. But I mean, you couldn't miss it. But it's just such a simple concept, and what I loved about those days. They were so simple, and they brought such joy. This game, I just thought, was a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal game. It's just brilliant. 3D monster maze. I loved it, and yeah. So that's the first one. So on to the next one, which is Space Raiders. Now, before I continue, I just want to say that all these games, I meant to say this on the last one, all these games are for the 16K ZX81. So you could only play these games if you had the 16K RAM pack, which is that little box on the back of the picture I was displaying earlier. As I said, if you didn't have that, then it was a 1K machine. And of course there were plenty of 1K games. It's just that all these are the 16K ones. So this is like these are the big games. Alright. So this is the cassette inlay for this game. Nice and colourful. Space Raiders. It's literally what you think. It conjures up is like the traditional Space Invader, which is what it is. It's the traditional Space Invaders game, but for the ZX81. This is the cassette. I don't have many pictures. I've only got 3 pictures for this particular one. I didn't find them very easy to come by, but yeah, this is the cassette, and this is what we used, ladies and gentlemen of the newer generations. This was how we loaded our games. Had to get a cassette player, put the tape in, type load, press play on the cassette player, and make sure we had the volume levels spot on, otherwise the game wouldn't load. You know, go make a cup of tea, hopefully by the time you come back, your game is loaded. And so this is a screenshot of the actual game. It's very basic, as you can see, but you can see it's an invader game with the bases at the bottom and the aliens coming down, which would get lower, and so on. And it was, yeah, I mean, you look at these graphics now and you think, oh my god, how basic is this, you know? But at the time it was like, wow, this is just incredible, you know. I can play Space Invaders in the comfort of my own bedroom, you know, literally. Didn't matter to me. You didn't have sound on the machine. You make your own sounds up, you know, with your powers and your kablams and your explosions and all the rest of it. But yeah, so that is Space Raider, and that was also I think actually this was the very first game I was introduced to by my friend. He loaded this game up, and I was like, wow, this is pretty incredible to be able to play Space Invaders in your bedroom. That was just amazing, and you don't need to keep feeding it 10p's, because that's what they cost back then, 10p in the arcade machine. But yeah, absolutely brilliant. So that's Space Raider. Okay, so on to the next game, which is called Bomber. Now, I don't remember if this was the cassette inlay that I saw, because, you know, I wasn't paying that much attention to it, to be honest. I was more interested in the actual games. This is another game where I could only get a couple of pictures of the game itself, so I won't have too many of those. But again, it's a very simple premise for the game. So Bomber, as the inlay implies there, you are flying a bomber plane. And let's go on to the first screenshot I have, and so you can see the graphics there. So your bomber plane is at the top there, so it would go along from left to right, and I suppose the grey graph at the bottom was representative of buildings. I don't know. It was a very simple game. You kind of hit fire and it would like send a bomb down. It would literally take down that column of the grey, you know, from all the way down. And as the bomber went from left to right, the next time it appeared on the screen, it would appear on the left side of the screen again, but just like one line lower. So it would get lower and lower as it went through. And the other screen is just another version of it, unless you hit the building, and then that was it, game over. Obviously you scored more points for, I suppose, the longer you stayed alive and the more buildings you bombed, I guess. And it was all randomized. Again, a very simple concept that brought so much joy. You know, you didn't need all this convoluted complexity that you get these days with game. You know, you can't have a game these days that's simple. And you know, I don't know if it's just me on this one, but sometimes I yearn for the old days. You know, with things like computer games and that. And we'll never see those days again, sadly, except in the form of like retro simulators and that kind of thing. But yeah, that was Bomber. Again, another great game. You know, shame about having to load it in, but yeah, another great game. But it was another 16K game, obviously, and yeah, just literally fantastic. Okay, on to the fourth game of this collection, and that comes in the form of Gulp. Now, I realise that the cassette you're looking at is Gulp too, but they're pretty much identical, more or less. And Gulp is essentially Pac-Man. That's basically what it is. Now, I don't know what came first, Gulp or Pac-Man, I don't know, and I don't really care. But this is what it is. Okay, this next screen is kind of like a primitive settings menu screen. One of the first games I saw to have these options where you could kind of customize a little bit here and there, which is pretty cool. And yeah, the screen here is it's like one of many mazes. I mean, there were loads of different mazes and they were all really cool. So you'd be, you know, the little 0 or the O, basically, because that's the limitation of the graphics. And there was like a flashing X that was going around, and he was the bad guy, and he was like the ghosts, I suppose, would be in Pac-Man. And he would chase you, and you'd have to complete the mazes. Absolutely brilliant. And yeah, so as you can see, different mazes, and I wasted many an hour on this game. I suppose this was one of the more complex of the time games. I mean, again, by today's standards, it's pretty basic and simplified, but yeah, it's a simple concept, really, though, isn't it? Like, even Pac-Man just going around a maze eating dots, pretty simple stuff, but yeah, hours and hours of fun. Okay, and finally, here we go, on to the 5th game. Although, as you may see, you're getting another game as well, so it's technically 6 games, and the reason for that is, as the cassette inlay shows there, Galaxians and Sword of Peace. Now, I never was able to find these games separately. Well, I think I could find Galaxians separately, but because this is the game, one of the games I was introduced to initially, you know, when I was a kid at school, it came with Sword of Peace on like the B side or whatever. It was the two were inseparable at the time. Arctic Computing, you know, you may be able to get them separately. I'm not saying you can't, but I never could. But that's fine. So you know, there's the cassette for it. You know, you've all seen them now. So let's have a look at the screenshot for Galaxians then. So I love the way they were so innovative on the ZX81 with the limitations of the graphics, of how they could recreate the same feel of a classic Galaxians game. You know it's Galaxians, there's a bunch of aliens at the top of the screen, and every so often one or more would break off in formation and fly down towards you, you know, shooting as they went. And that was it. That was so cool. Again, like I say, it didn't matter that there was no sound effects. I made my own up. It's fine, you know. Again, I spent many hours on this simple game. How simple is that? But yeah, that's, you know, that is Galaxians. There's not much more I can say about that. So on to the little bonus one then, which was Sword of Peace. Now, I can remember my friend saying, well, the thing about Sword of Peace is a bit different. I was like, oh, how is that then? He said, well, you don't actually see any graphics as such. It's like text information to you. So this is before the times of like type-in text adventure games. I was like, well, how does that work then? So he explained, it's basically, I mean, I don't remember an awful lot about it. You were trying to locate a certain item or something by inputting directions and coordinates, and it would, you know, give you clues to when you're getting closer. And there was nothing graphically on a visual representation at all. It was purely text driven. But I remember at the time I quite liked it. It wasn't my favourite game, but it wasn't the worst game. It was, I quite enjoyed it. But the fact that it was just so different, really, I suppose, I felt, I've got a well-rounded bunch of games here. Well, these are all these games I've shown you today were some of the games that my friend had with his ZX81 and was able to obviously showcase to me at the time. And I will say in this this first video of the series, how, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but how lucky, I suppose, I was to have lived in that era, because you just don't get the same feeling these days with a computer game, unless it's got like hyper realism, awesome, 4K graphics and amazing super realistic sound effects that are indistinguishable from the real thing. It's just I like the simple 8-bit nostalgia, which to me at the time was groundbreaking, and it was groundbreaking for the time. The fact that you could get these games, even these type-in games, on a machine, on your desk, on a for the ZX81, it was no bigger than a notebook. Even by today's standards, it was a small machine. I don't know how they fitted it all in there, to be truthful, but these are 5 games, or at least the 5 bundles, or the 5 cassettes. That 5 games I love, or if you want to be technical, 6 games I love on the ZX81. There will be more to follow. Thank you for watching me thus far, and please watch out for more of these memory lane computer nostalgia trips. Thank you ever so much. Bye for now. Bye bye.